Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Stacey Hardy Chandler, CEO of the Association of Social Work Boards. We're really glad you're here. Today, we're all about giving you clear, practical insight into licensure, what it is, how it works, and how to navigate it with confidence. There's a lot of misinformation out there, so think of this as your opportunity to get grounded, ask questions, and leave feeling prepared for what's ahead. Thanks for spending time with us. Now let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Ashley Lane, and I am a coordinator with ASWB's regulatory education team. I'm also a licensed master social worker in the state of Virginia. Prior to becoming licensed, I obtained my bachelor's degree in social work from a school in Massachusetts called Westfield State. I then joined a program called Teach for America, where I served as a teacher for 2 years. And then I went on to get my master's in social work, and I actually had the opportunity to intern here with ASWB, and it was an amazing experience, and I learned a lot. Before our other presenter introduces herself, I want to take a moment to introduce Samantha Brennan, who you all just met. She's going to be our moderator for tonight. She serves as a coordinator with our Communications and Public Relations Department and has been instrumental in helping to create and implement this series. And now I'm going to pass it off to Dion.
Thank you, Ashley. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Dion Brown Bushrod. I am a licensed certified clinical social worker. I'm licensed in Maryland. I serve as the Director of Education Programs for ASWB. I was licensed, I like to say, back in the 1900s. I started with my licensed graduate category licensure, and 2 years after that, I received my license in the clinical category. I've been licensed since 1996. I've used my license, I've stretched it into clinical and meso roles and macro roles, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. We are joined, as you see, by one special guest, and we have another special guest coming up a little bit later in the presentation.
Before we get started, we'd like to take a moment to thank you for being here today. We know your time is valuable and you could be doing many other things right now. The fact that you've chosen to spend it with us, learning more about social work licensure, truly means a lot. Even if it may not feel like it yet, simply showing up today is an important step. By being here, you're already taking meaningful action towards success on your licensure journey. Now let's get to the poll results.
All right, I am ready to share those poll results. Thank you again, everyone, for participating. So it looks like 34% is our top answer at how to prepare for the exam, what to study, how to think, and anxiety. 29% for how licensure applies to macro, non-clinical, or leadership roles. 18% for license types and mobility, LMSW versus LCSW, Advanced Generalist Compact. 17%, I'm early in the process and not sure where to start. Well, we are definitely here to help. And 3%, timing and eligibility, when can I test, supervision, and next steps. Thank you all for participating in our poll.
We'll address these topics today, connect macro practice to licensure and career paths, and share where to find official answers so you can avoid misinformation. You will also know where to go to find official answers to avoid more misinformation. Let's start with the foundational question. So what is macro social work? Macro social work focuses on systems, policies, and communities and how laws and institutions shape people's lives. At its core, macro is about big picture change. Instead of asking, how do I help this one person, we're asking, how do we change the system so fewer people experience this problem at all? And to put it in context, social work happens at the micro, meso, and macro levels. All three are essential. Macro is about impact across entire populations. In macro work, your client is the system, an organization, a community, a business, or even the data driving decisions. Now that we've defined macro social work, here's why it matters. A lot of the challenges people face aren't just individual issues, they're shaped by systems. Macro practitioners work upstream to address root causes and redesign the policies and structures that create barriers in the first place. That's what we mean by impact at scale. Change that reaches beyond one person or one family and improves the conditions people live in every day. So macro social work is powerful because it creates change that extends far beyond any single interaction and it influences the condition people live in every day.
So at registration, we asked you all to share your job titles. This word cloud shows the range of roles in today's session. One important theme across all of these roles is licensure. Licensure supports public trust and professional accountability across all settings, not just one job title. We received a lot of questions that seemed to position the clinical license as the highest license. We want you to keep in mind that there is no category of licensure that's over another category of licensure. Clinical specialization isn't higher or lower, okay? It's not higher or lower than generalist or advanced generalist, just like a family medicine physician isn't better than or higher than a pediatrician. Different focus areas, same profession. Our CEO puts it perfectly. I borrowed this quote from her. Licensure is a matter of proportion. While clinical social workers primarily focus on micro direct practice, they do so best when they understand and can navigate the macro factors that impact all categories of practice. So thank you, Dr. Stacy Hardy Chandler, for letting me steal your line, and I did that publicly. So, building on all of that, let's make it concrete. Here are a few common roles in social work practice, macro social work practice. So, you might be a policy analyst shaping legislation, a community organizer mobilizing people for local change, or a program developer designing and improving services. You may also serve as an advocate or a lobbyist, influencing decision making, or a researcher or an evaluator, like the data-driven decisions that Ashley mentioned. So the key takeaway here is social work is one of the few professions where your license opens doors across career paths. Now, macro social work requires a versatile skill set. On the strategy side, you're using systems thinking, assessment, and planning. And on the leadership side, you're maybe managing and guiding teams and partnerships and implementing organizational vision. The researcher, Dr. Joy Kim, did a whole body of research on our social work census, the workforce studies, and her findings kind of reinforce why all of this matters. And in Dr. Kim's findings, she expressed that macro work shows up across multiple licensed social work categories, and they also show up in roles that aren't always titled or structured as licensed social work. So being able to name macro social work practice is important because it connects the practice of social work and sorry, and it connects the roles of what we're doing. It really helps to translate social work's integrity and professionalism.
You'll find macro practitioners in government agencies, nonprofits and NGOs, think tanks, and foundations doing everything from policy work to program strategy, research, and funding decisions. The big point is this: the setting may change, but the focus stays the same: system level impact that improves conditions for communities. To illustrate macro practice in action, we'd like you to hear from our special guests, Dr. Stacy Hardy Chandler, who's the ASWB CEO, and Jennifer Hinkle, the ASWB Senior Director of Member Engagement and Regulatory Services. You will first hear from Stacy, who will talk about her career path in macro work, and Jennifer will share the same. Thank you so much for being here, Stacy.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to start out by highlighting the fact that even though I started out my career as a clinician dedicated to clinical work, my career journey is a testament to the fact that clinical and macro are part of an important continuum. So I did start out in therapy as a cognitive behavioral therapy and therapist, and as part of my work, there was a lot of psychoeducation, and that I didn't know it at the time was sort of the prelude prelude to the next phase of my career, which was entering academia. So I really appreciated teaching and recognized how those skills that I used as part of my clinical life really contributed to the kind of classroom environment I created. And I continued to work in clinical practice, but also started supervising people for licensure and also taking on a lot of administrative roles. I was the assistant director of the school, the director of field education, the graduate coordinator for a while, Title III coordinator, a whole lot of administrative roles that I didn't know it at the time, set the stage for me to advance to very clear macro roles. So after I left academia, I had jobs that involved oversight of large organizations in senior management and human services, overseeing very diverse programs, serving large communities. And even though I didn't know it at the time, all three of those phases of my career set me up quite perfectly for this work in regulation, where we're working with jurisdictions across the United States and Canada. Um, that is my primary role, but very recently, and I believe that this is the ultimate macro practice. I was elected as the first Black member of City Council in the city of Fairfax, where I live. So I want to just take a little bit of a moment to encourage those who are interested in macro level change to run for office. But let me be clear, I'm not a politician. I consider myself actually a macro clinician. And so that's been my career journey. Jennifer?
Thanks, Stacy, and thank you, Dion and Ashley, for inviting me here this evening. It's an honor to be with all of you tonight. And thank you for being here at 7 o'clock East Coast time to talk about macro social work practice. What an interesting topic to want to spend our evening together for. So I have 30 years as a social worker. As I was reflecting on this and preparing for this, I got my my LSW for New Jersey when I graduated with my MSW. And I have been able to work in a broad spectrum of professional environments, starting in a psychiatric emergency room, where, as you can imagine, lots of macro social work happens in a psych ER and lots of micro practice as well. Then I went on to manage a group home for medically fragile children with the AIDS Resource Foundation for Children. Went on to therapeutic foster care, and then I was a director and supervisor in community mental health, outpatient clinics, and then a director for intensive in-home, where I had to decode Medicaid policy. Lots of macro work trying to figure out Medicaid policy, CMS, and how we could actually get funding to provide intensive in-home and wraparound services. Did a little stint teaching some for an MSW program, and now currently at ASWB. Lots of macro work in regulation. And all of these settings allowed me to look at client and client systems from a macro perspective, as well as to analyze and comprehend the policies and systemic frameworks within the clients, with when the clients have to operate. So really grateful for my opportunities in social work, and have really felt like my career has allowed me to do lots of things. And Stacy's charged you to think about working in politics, or volunteering in politics, I should say. I'd love you to think about being a regulator and volunteering on your regulatory boards. We need regulators. So I will pass it back to Ashley as our ask, and continue on tonight.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Stacy, for being here. We really appreciate you sharing your perspectives and your journeys. So as you can see, macro practice shows up at the micro, meso, and macro levels, and our client can be an individual, a family, a group, an organization, a community, or a system. And the how can look really different: direct service, program design and improvement, policy work, research and evaluation, or leadership and administration. Another real-world example of a macro social worker is Marette Monson. Marette is a licensed social worker. She has served in both macro and micro roles, ranging from being a nationally recognized disabilities rights activist and expert to owning and operating her own private practice. If you are interested in learning more about Marette, my full interview with her will be available soon.
Hey, guess what? It's time for another poll. What are some of the common traits between Stacy, Jennifer, and Marette's careers? I'm going to launch the poll now, and hopefully we'll see the results soon. Your options are they are licensed social workers, they are organizers, planners, and general rabble rousers, they are persistent, or all of the above. We will give the poll just another minute. Looks like almost everybody has participated.
Thank you, Samantha. Appreciate it. Okay, so yes, we have all of the above at 91%. Absolutely. Social work, we get into spaces and we shake things up and we have to be persistent and you've got to be organized and all of those things. So thank you all so much for participating in the poll and hopefully you use the word rabble rousers in your lexicon. I like to use it a lot, especially when we're talking about social work. So yes, this is a perfect lead in because we got a lot of questions that were about some misconceptions, really, especially around licensure. People didn't want to know about ability. People really wanted to understand just what is this connection between macro and licensure. So we want you to think of it this way. At the master category of licensure, where our generalist and clinical and advanced generalist, right? With your master's degree, let's just use that example. The LMSW shouldn't be thought of solely as an entry point for clinical practice. You heard both Stacy and Jennifer's story and my story as well. I started as a clinician. So it's not just the entry point for clinical practice. Many macro level social workers, it's the terminal license, meaning that is why they got into the profession. That is why they got licensed as an advanced journalist. They intended to work in the profession in that space, right? Terminal means that this is the highest level of credentialing that they plan to pursue. So we want to keep that in mind because, again, there are these misconceptions that clinical licensure is above all other licenses. So let's move on and kind of bust a few other myths.
I'm going to be honest, this is my favorite part of the presentation. These myths and facts are so, so great. So, Dr. Hardy Chandler, I'm going to give you our first myth. Macro focused licensure won't benefit my career.
Well, that's absolutely a myth. We have a lot of research that shows that licensure at all of the categories do benefit people's careers. And not only that, it really is a shorthand message to the public. Um, Licensure is not just a permission slip to practice. It tells people about your journey to being in that space at that time, that you've gone through a rigorous educational program, that you have passed a licensure exam that is informed by the information that macro practicing social workers feel is important, and that you just have the background and expertise. So it's telling that little piece of paper that has your license on it is telling the world all of that in a shorthand. So it matters not only to the individual, it matters to the public that we're serving, and it also matters in upholding our profession.
Thank you so much. Our next myth is for Dion. Macro social workers don't need to worry about licensure exams.
That's a myth. Even though a vignette might describe a specific practice setting, the correct answer is the same. So I wouldn't say you don't worry about it because it's completely part of your social work knowledge. So no matter where the practice occurs, you want to consider and understand that the exam is about testing your knowledge, skills, and abilities. And those knowledge, skills, and abilities reach across all areas of social work.
Thank you so much. Jennifer, I've got one for you next. Macro work doesn't count toward licensure.
Untrue. Licensure is important. Whether you're practicing clinically, bachelor's, master's, whatever, you should get licensed. So your macro experience, you should get licensed, and you should look at the requirements for your state licensing board so you can become licensed in the state where you're going to live and practice.
Well, if we're going to go down this state where you live and practice, another one for you. Macro social workers don't need to worry about mobility or the compact.
Well, that's an interesting concept, Sam, because I think we're so mobile today in 2026 that it's nice to think we don't have to move, but we are. And electronic practice really makes us need to think differently about practice. So we need to be aware about the opportunities to practice across state lines and be aware if we are eligible for the compact licensure, which I will talk about in a few slides, foreshadowing. So we are eligible in over 30 states to get a multi-state license as soon as those are being issued. So it will be worth thinking about. And those licenses will be available for licensed bachelors, licensed masters, and licensed clinical social workers. And macro will fall under those categories. So we can talk about those in a few slides.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for participating in our myths and facts section.
So now we're going to briefly look at education and career in macro social work. So at the BSW and MSW levels, there are opportunities to engage in macro practice. Some schools offer macro-focused MSW tracks where students concentrate on policy, leadership, and community practice. Field placements are especially important. They give you hands-on experience in real-world macro settings. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stacy Hardy-Chandler to talk more about licensed macro social work practice from the perspective of a former social work educator.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes, one of the things that we learn in school is that learning is lifelong. Learning is not something that stops when you get the degree, when you graduate. We have an ethical commitment to continue to learn and to grow and to evolve our skills because our societies change, the needs of our client systems change. And not only that, if you read the Code of Ethics, macro social workers in particular have a responsibility to provide a context where other social workers can learn. So that starts hopefully in your educational institution, but continues throughout. The other part about licensure is that when you renew your license, you usually attest that you have completed continuing education credits. It's a way of having some accountability that that continuing education is happening. Dion talked about getting her license, back in 1990 something. Certainly, all of us should not continue to practice at the level where we initially got our license, but to continue to evolve and grow. So education is a commitment, and it certainly is a macro commitment for macro practitioners and for the teams they may be supervising or those who are working on those teams. Okay, I can continue on with that. Talking about the fact that, I think that sometimes I want to go back to some of the myths a little bit about macro practice. We all, regardless of the category, have an ethical responsibility to the public, and that licensure upholds that, it supports that. There's also a title protection element because we want people who are working with macro social workers to know exactly what they're getting, the quality of the experience and training that they're getting. And that scope of practice is defined by that title protection. It also supports the credibility. There's a lot of discussion right now about social work being a profession. Well, it's these kinds of standards that support why we are a profession. Being a profession is not just a word, it comes with certain standards. And for macro practitioners, Again, that applies for all categories of practice in social work. When I think about conversations that I have with other health professions, the concept that a category would not be licensed is just unfathomable. You need a license to practice, you need a license to drive legally. So licensure matters on multiple levels, and I hope that people get an opportunity to, sort of spread that word and advocate for licensure. Moving on, I really am excited to highlight the fact that ASWB is a practicum site. Ashley is a practicum success story for ASWB. She had her practicum with us. We also evolved the practicum experience and we hosted an executive social work leadership practicum last year. I personally supervised the macro student who is at our site. Now, we're going to do it again next year. We're going to have the executive leadership as well as a regulatory internship. But if you haven't applied, you have until 11:59 tomorrow to apply for this amazing opportunity to get such wonderful broad macro experience at a social work organization that really is binational. Again, touching all 50 states, U.S. territories, and the Canadian provinces. And I just want to applaud Karima, who is our student who will be graduating with her MSW in macro social work practice. She has already been promoted in her job, and she is also continuing to contribute to ASWB. So, Ashley, being one of our earlier practicum students and others, consider a practicum in regulation. But also, if you know of an organization that can host macro students, I encourage all organizations that have the capacity to do so. It makes not only a rich learning experience for the student, but it makes the organization better.
Thank you so much, Stacy. As she mentioned, I was an intern at ASWB, and I just cannot encourage you all enough to apply for this opportunity. I really learned a lot, and it was definitely a life-changing experience for me. But at the same time, if you are interested in macro practice and have a different organization in mind, and you don't know if they necessarily can have a field placement for you, don't be afraid to ask. That's a very important part of doing macro work. Sometimes you have to ask for what you want. And this is a great opportunity to advocate for yourself and see if you can get a field placement set up at other places as well. So up next, we're going to reference the Advanced Generalist Licensure. Licensure is board specific by design, so the title, the application process, and even what counts for supervision or experience can vary. To help make sense of that, we're going to use a simple framework you may have heard before, the 3 E's and a C. We're not going to spend long here because most of you asked that we focus more on aligning careers to macro social work practice and licensure. So we will go through this very quickly. And you can also look at our previous webinars when the recordings are posting for a more in-depth dive through all of the different qualifications across states. So boards are usually looking for 4 different things. Education, so that would be your degree from typically a CSWE accredited school. Experience, the type and amount of supervision, social work experience that you have to have. Examination, the social work licensing exam category that matches with the category of licensure you are seeking. And character, so this can include background checks, fingerprinting, and it's often referred to as like good moral character and regulation. And since examination is the piece generating a lot of questions, especially for macro folks, Dion is going to give a quick overview of what the Advanced Generalist Social Work Licensing Exam is and what it's designed to assess.
Yep. Perfect. Thanks, Ashley. So while it is imperative to ensure you're taking the exam category that corresponds with the category of licensure that you're looking for, today we're specifically talking about the Advanced Generalist exam. The exam is a standardized professional licensing exam, so it's going to feel very different from a school test. This professional licensing exam is developed by licensed social workers and it's tailored to advance generalist social work knowledge. The exam is designed to assess day one, first day on the job competency. Competence is defined as safe and ethical decision making in licensed social work practice. Okay. The development of the exam goes through a rigorous process, starting with a practice analysis that's led by social work subject matter experts, practicing social workers, okay, and psychometrists. The current exam format is 170 questions in a 4-hour testing window with a 10-minute scheduled break after 85 questions into the exam. When the break begins, you cannot return to the first 85 questions, so pace yourself and plan your time accordingly. Now, August 3rd, 2026, the exams will be updated. The exam will have 122 questions with a greater share of 3 option items and fewer 4 option items. And for sure, I know Samantha mentioned put your questions in the Q&A. So if you have questions about the exam, put them in the Q&A.
Even with upcoming exam changes, your preparation approach does not change. Between May through August 2026, both current and updated resources will be accessible online. For details on eligibility timelines and updates, review the ASWB examination guidebook and your board's licensure application instructions. In general, the process of applying for a license looks like this. Step 1, apply to your board for licensure. Then you'll register and pay for the social work licensing exam with ASWB. After you register, you will receive the authorization to test, and then you'll be able to schedule with the Pearson VUE Testing Center to sit for the licensing exam. When you register, you will also be invited to access our free test mastery mindset tool and the online practice test. Highly, highly recommend that you check out those resources. They are incredibly helpful. And at any time, you can also access information on non-standard testing arrangements. And links will be provided for these, all these resources that we're throwing at you. The links will be provided in the resources tab of this webinar. And always, always feel free to reach out to our team at candidateservices@aswb.org. They're a great group of people and always happy to help.
So on exam day, you will arrive to a Pearson VUE Testing Center, and you'll complete standard checking and security procedures. As I mentioned, there is a designated 10-minute break after 85 questions in. You cannot return to the first 85 questions at the start or after the break. You may, though, take additional breaks, but the testing clock does not stop.
To prepare, you're going to want to start with reviewing the ASWB examination guidebook. The guidebook is a free download you can find on the ASWB website. We recommend using it as your source of truth because it explains how questions are written, what they're asking you to do, and which content areas apply to the advanced generalist and other exam categories. The guidebook also includes reference lists, content outlines, sample questions, for all of the licensing exam categories. So definitely download and check it out and share it with all of your friends that are going to be preparing for the licensing exam.
Now, while you're reviewing the guidebook cover to cover, we encourage you to pay close attention to the content outlines for the advanced journalist exam. Look at the content outline and the corresponding reference lists. If your state does not offer the advanced generalist license and you still want to be licensed and do macro work, you may consider taking the bachelor's or master's exam. Now, we get this question a lot. What do you study? How do you study? A strong study strategy is to pair content review with decision making practice and be sure to train your brain to focus on what the question is asking you, right? Is the question asking you to do something first, next, or most? Also, keep in mind the exam is not trying to trick you. There's only one answer, right? You won't have B and C or all of the above. There's only one answer. As you practice, be sure to time yourself and keep your mindset on practicing. I'm a practicing ethical, safe social worker. So when I studied for both of my exams, I reviewed every question I got right and every question I got wrong. And I meticulously went through my references. I don't know how it is for you all these days, but I kept every book. Every social work book because I paid $500 for them, and in the buyback they wanted to give me $1. So my silent protest was I kept all of my books, but I'm glad that I did because when I studied, I went through all the literature, challenging myself, my decision making. How did I come up with this answer instead of just, oh, I got this answer right? I really focused on why did I get to that answer? Um, Keep in mind, we have a free resource for educators and supervisors. It's the group review practice questions. It's a free set of practice questions. Um, Contact us at info@aswb.org and we'll be happy to get that information to you. And before we move on, Ashley, what did you do to study? What helped you to prepare?
Yeah. So what helped me the most was probably the online practice test. I accessed that almost immediately once I was registered, and I took it just to kind of gauge where I was at and narrow down what specific areas I really needed to hone my studying in on. And that helped a lot. I also joined a study group that was very helpful. And then also just trusting myself and remembering that, I in the time had been through 5, 6 years of education. I had done my field placements, I had done all the stepping stones leading up to this moment, and it's just one more step. So just really trusting myself helped as well.
Got it. Thanks. Okay, so now that we've gone over the qualifications for licensure and how to prepare, let's shift to talk about licensure itself, starting with understanding who regulates social work. So, in macro practice and any practice category in social work, there should be an understanding that there are two systems that we'd like you to get to know, your state board and ASWB. Once a state deems a profession as a profession, the state will create social work licensing laws and regulations and a board of social work, and that board of social work is considered the umbrella that protects the public. Now, since ASWB is not a state entity and does not regulate social work, that means that we do not issue licenses. However, we are more than happy to help support you. So if you contact us, we'll do our very best to guide you to the right information. We also, as an organization, we support the boards with exam services and regulatory research. So as we are supporting them, we are again happy to support you to help you find the answers to your questions.
So ASWB maintains a laws and regulations database, and this is a very helpful resource that will also be available. Samantha put it in just now. And it provides a really high level overview of state specific requirements for licensure. And then it also allows you to compare rules across jurisdictions. So it's a really great tool to help you get a quick snapshot of what you need to do to be licensed in a specific jurisdiction. Um, and yeah, so now Jennifer, if you want to take us and talk about the compact a little bit, we'd love to hear about all you've done.
We did
As
tease this earlier, so we kind of have to.
Yeah, as promised, as foreshadowed, even. So, the Social Work Licensure Compact is an interstate occupational licensure compact. Interstate compacts are constitutionally authorized, legislatively enacted, legally binding agreements among states. So, this compact in particular will enable regulated social workers with bachelor's, master's, and clinical licenses to serve clients in every state that joins the compact. So rather than going through the licensure process in every state where they want to practice, they will just be able to get a multi-state license. So 30 plus states have enacted compact legislation. 7 states have legislation pending. And when we were determining what model we wanted to use for the social work licensure compact, there was one woman on the technical advisory committee. She had, I think, 24 individual state licenses. So that's really how we determined we wanted a multi-state license. We really took input from social workers practicing and what their needs were. So let's go to the next slide and talk about how this will look in practice, Sam. So a social worker will have to be either eligible for or hold an unencumbered license in her home state. And she will apply for a multi-state license. That home state will verify that the social worker meets the compact's requirements based on the license category. Again, that's the bachelor's, master's, and clinical. And so for most people, the macro license will fall under that master's category. We did a lot of cross mapping to make sure that that would fall in that chunk. And so it really does meet eligibility there. So states that have a specific AG or macro license, master's was most likely the common spot. So think about that for Tennessee or Minnesota, and you can put in questions there if you have more specific questions. Happy to discuss those individual states. And once a multi-state license is issued by the home state, then the social worker will be able to practice in any of the 30 plus states once the system is up and running. So kind of in terms of next steps, the data system is being developed right now. And once the data system is up and running and the rules are all finalized, then the states can start issuing those multi-state licenses. So I'm pretty optimistic that that will be happening by the end of 2026. I would love to say that's going to happen. So if you want to, get your betting cards ready, we'll see how soon this can happen. So looking forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So we have thrown a lot of information at you, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions. But I just want to take a moment and say that you do not have to hold all of the rules or all of the information that we shared in your head. You just need to know where to confirm the information. So for compact matters, visit swcompact.org. The compact and other resources will be shared with all attendees by mid-April, and also be sure to follow us on our socials for updates and tips. And we also want to just call out a reminder that licensure is a process. Use today's overview to plan your next steps and rely on official sources when you need the right answer.
Before we shift into our Q&A section, we wanted to go over what our next steps are. So please look out for a post-webinar survey, along with you should receive the recordings and handouts and all of our slide decks by the middle or end of April is what we're tracking towards that. So without further ado, we are going to go over into our Q&A section. And as a reminder, if your question is state specific, we'll point you back to your licensing board. If it's exam related, we'll point you to the relevant ASWB resource. We've grouped your questions and we'll include additional pre-submitted questions when we share the recordings. We'll start with a few pre-submitted questions and then move on to the live Q&A feature. So for our first question, under the category of macro practicums and clinical exams, how can students who have primarily completed practicums in macro-focused settings best prepare for the clinical-focused questions on the exam?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because as someone who focused on macro practice and completed a macro practicum, I remember thinking, how is this going to apply to the licensing exam? But then when I started preparing to take my next steps in my licensure journey, I realized something really important, that no matter what setting your practicum is in, the way you prepare for the social work licensing exam is essentially the same. It comes down to a few key strategies: using the ASWB examination guidebook and other trusted resources, focusing on core social work knowledge, learning how to identify what to do first, next, or most, and consistently practicing with really realistic exam style questions. And one more important shift in perspective: even in macro settings, you still have clients. They just may look different. So instead of individuals, your clients might be communities, organizations, or even data.
Licensure, leadership, and advancement, macro careers. If I do not intend to open a clinical practice and instead be a social sector leader, why should I consider licensure? And Dr. Hardy Chandler, we're going to ask you to answer that one for us if you don't mind.
So I'd like to answer that question a little bit more broadly, and that is starting with the value of macro licensure. So if someone gives me advice, the first thing I do is ask what they are doing. So I'll start with what ASWB does. All social work positions, 100% of social work positions at our agency require licensure. And you'll find that one of the things that we value is the sort of critical thinking that comes from not only having the educational experience and the practicum experience, but also having passed a licensing exam that is really about critical thinking. The second thing I want to emphasize regarding your question is I really appreciate that while I thought my whole career was going to be clinical, and I kind of because of my openness and certain pathways ended up in a very macro role, I really appreciate that my profession also has pathways for people who know they want to go in that macro direction. I still believe it's a matter of proportion. I believe that clinicians need to understand macro systems. And quite frankly, if we're honest, if you've met macro practitioners, the really good one, have clinical skills, or we'll say interpersonal skills. So there are definitely opportunities. For a while, there were a number of people that I knew who had sort of macro practices where their focus was really on, or actually, I know someone now, where their practice wasn't on clinical diagnoses, but actually on helping organizations identify their strategic direction and helping them effectuate their services to clients, those kinds of things. So there are many, many ways in which macro practitioners can serve. And to think that sort of the narrow view of the clinical psychotherapy practice as being the only route to sort of independent practice, I think is a myth that hopefully we've gotten you to think about busting.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you one more question from this category. What can a macro student do more to secure a position with a higher pay? This is one we get a lot.
Well, higher pay. Now, so that's an interesting thing. So I mentioned earlier that the data shows that, first of all, once you graduate, licensure seems to be correlated with higher pay. But I also think part of it is macro advocacy for the profession to be paid commensurate with the experience and the knowledge that we bring to professions. The other thing I think for an individual is to make sure that you're coming to an opportunity and you're able to demonstrate that you're the most competitive person. And I'll just take a little side note and say social work is a historically female profession, and females historically have not been proactive in negotiating salary in the way that men have in our particular society. So one of the things that you can actually do is ask for a higher salary. You may or may not get it, but that's one of the things that I find social workers do less, and that is explore broader financial opportunities or even promotional roles. But again, I think that's part of the legacy of our very proud profession. But we have to remember that some of the sociological dynamics that impact our clients also impact us.
Thank you so much. For our third category, licensure options. If my state does not offer a specific macro or advanced generalist license, how should I think about choosing a licensure pathway that still aligns with my macro career goals?
Thinking that one was for
Definitely.
me, Sam. So, was that me or was that
You can take
Dion?
it, Jennifer. Nope, you can take it.
Okay.
Lightning
Well,
answer.
licensure, as I think as Dion and Stacy and I all pointed out, we've all had pretty long careers and pretty varied careers, and we've all been licensed the entire time, it seems like. So I think getting either your LSW or LMSW when you get your master's, whatever that kind of generalist license is to start with, makes a lot of sense as you kind of figure out what you're doing, whether that's macro or generalist as you explore if you want to head to clinical or not. There's nothing, I mean, the generalist license is there for a very good reason because there's so many opportunities in social work. So I think you should absolutely start with that LMSW or LSW, depending on what is available in your state or jurisdiction. It's a foundation to build on. And I was an LSW that became an LCSW. Dion, you also transitioned, right, from one license to another. So I think it's there for us to switch licenses, to transition from license to license.
Dion, anything to add? Jennifer, thank you so much.
I think Jennifer said it perfectly. I love being licensed because of the very thing that Stacy and Jennifer are bringing up is the the way that the license can just carry you through different layers of your career. It's always really rewarding for me when I'm seeing job postings like my job at ASWB to be able to go through that list, like, oh, yes, this is all generalist practice that I've been doing my entire career. And having that license has really helped me get in spaces that I'm completely qualified for.
Thank you so much. Career options. Jennifer, I have another question for you. If I start my career in macro practice, how does licensure help keep clinical or other practice options open later?
Yeah, because if you know systems, then you know how to help individuals. There's actually no better training ground for individual and clinical practice than macro, I would say, and vice versa. Frankly, I think if you know how to help an individual, then you know how to work in systems. And if you know how to work in systems, then you know how to work with individuals. I mean, that's the beauty in social work is really that person and environment and the systems perspective. You can go in both directions bi-directionally, and you can't do it just in a vacuum. You have to understand the person and how they have to navigate in the bigger system. So I think, and Ashley, I think you would say that too as a student, as a recent grad, that you really understood that firsthand. And Ashley would come back and she would say, I don't understand how come my classmates are just seeing it like so polarized. So we had some interesting conversations with her perspective, watching her clinical classmates. I don't know if you'd want to add anything from that, from, your more recent time in the classroom versus mine.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it really well. And I think just to emphasize that having the perspective of both micro and macro and combining them is just really powerful. Um, and it really sets you up and sets you apart from a lot of people. So I just really strongly encourage you all to explore all the different options that you have.